Deep beneath the forests of Lower Silesia in Poland, there exists a network of tunnels that the locals call the Giant. For decades, treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and amateur historians have descended into these dark passages, searching for something that may never have existed. They're looking for Die Glocke, the bell, a device that some claim was Adolf Hitler's secret time machine. But the real story is far more complex and far more fascinating than any legend. In the spring of 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Nazi Germany from the east and Allied armies advanced from the west, something strange happened in the underground facilities near the Wenceslaus mine. According to local witnesses, German SS officers spent 72 frantic hours destroying documents, dismantling equipment, and executing prisoners who had worked on classified projects. Then they vanished. What were they hiding? And more importantly, what truth lies buried beneath decades of myth and speculation? The legend of Hitler's time machine didn't begin in 1945. It began 55 years later, in the year 2000, when a Polish journalist named Igor Witkowski published a book that would ignite imaginations around the world. Witkowski claimed he had been granted access to classified transcripts of interrogations conducted by Polish intelligence. In these documents, he said, a former SS officer described a top-secret project unlike anything the world had ever seen. The project was called Die Glocke, and according to this testimony, it was a bell-shaped metallic device approximately 9 feet wide and 15 feet tall, weighing several tons. 2 counter-rotating cylinders inside the bell contained a mysterious substance code-named Xerum 525. When activated, the device supposedly generated enormous energy fields that could bend space and time itself. The description was electrifying. Witkowski claimed the bell had been tested in a concrete structure known as the Henge, similar to Stonehenge, and that scientists who worked too close to it suffered horrific side effects: internal bleeding, nerve damage, and rapid aging. He suggested the device might have been a prototype for anti-gravity propulsion, or even more fantastically, a functional time machine. The location: the Riese complex, part of a massive network of underground installations built by forced labor in occupied Poland during the final years of the war. The story spread like wildfire. Authors, television producers, and documentary filmmakers seized upon it. The narrative was perfect. Nazi scientists, occult experimentation, secret superweapons, and the ultimate mystery. A machine that could conquer time itself. But there was one fundamental problem. No one could verify any of it. Witkowski claimed he had only seen transcripts, not original documents. No photographs of Die Glocke have ever surfaced, no blueprints, no physical evidence, no corroborating testimony from any other source. The entire legend rested on the word of one journalist describing documents he could not produce. So what really happened in those underground tunnels? To understand the truth, we need to separate verified history from modern mythology. And the verified history is, in many ways, even more remarkable than the fantasy. Because while Die Glocke was almost certainly a fabrication, the Nazis absolutely did develop revolutionary weapons that changed warfare forever. They called them Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. And some of these projects were so advanced that they provided the foundation for technologies we still use today. Let's start with something that definitely existed: the V-2 rocket. On September 8, 1944, a 46-foot-tall missile lifted off from occupied Holland, arced into the edge of space, and fell silently onto a suburb of London at 3 times the speed of sound. There was no warning, no air raid siren, just a sudden, devastating explosion followed seconds later by the sound of the rocket's approach. This was the world's first ballistic missile, and it represented a quantum leap in military technology. The V-2 was designed by a team led by Wernher von Braun, a brilliant engineer who had dreamed of space travel since childhood, but found himself building weapons for a regime he later claimed to have privately opposed. The V-2 program was a marvel of engineering and a monument to human cruelty. The rockets were assembled in underground factories by concentration camp prisoners working under nightmarish conditions. Thousands perished from exhaustion, starvation, and execution. More people died building the V-2 than were killed by it. Yet from a purely technical standpoint, the achievement was undeniable. The V-2 was the ancestor of every space rocket that followed, from the Saturn V that took humans to the moon to the intercontinental ballistic missiles that defined the Cold War. But the V-2 wasn't the only revolutionary aircraft the Nazis deployed. In July 1944, Allied pilots over Germany began reporting encounters with something they had never seen before. Enemy fighters with no propellers, moving at impossible speeds. These were Messerschmitt Me-262 jets, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. With a top speed exceeding 500 miles per hour, the Me-262 could outrun any Allied plane in the sky. Fortunately for the Allies, the jet arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome of the war. But its psychological impact was profound. Pilots who encountered it described a sense of fighting an enemy from the future. Even more futuristic was a prototype that never saw combat, but anticipated stealth technology by decades. The Horten Ho-229 was a flying-wing jet bomber with no tail and minimal radar signature. If you placed a photograph of it next to the American B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, you would see an eerie resemblance. Only 2 prototypes were built before the war ended. One was captured by American forces and is now stored at the Smithsonian Institution, where engineers continue to study its aerodynamic design. Then there was the Nazi nuclear program. Unlike Die Glocke, this was entirely real, and for a few years it terrified Allied intelligence. The WWII, or Uranium Club, brought together some of Germany's greatest physicists, including Nobel laureate Werner Heisenberg. They had the theoretical knowledge to build an atomic bomb. They had access to uranium. They had the motivation. So, why didn't they succeed? The reasons are complex. Internal rivalries fragmented the German scientific effort. The regime's persecution of Jewish scientists had driven away much of the country's top talent, including Albert Einstein. Resources were diverted to more immediate projects, and perhaps most critically, Heisenberg and his colleagues made fundamental errors in their calculations about how much fissile material would be needed. By the time the Manhattan Project detonated the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert in July 1945, the German program was years behind. When the war ended, the race was on. American, Soviet, and British intelligence teams fanned out across occupied Germany, hunting for technology, documents, and above all, scientists. The Americans launched Operation Paperclip, a covert program that brought more than 1,600 German engineers, technicians, and researchers to the United States. The Soviets conducted similar operations. Wernher von Braun and most of his rocket team surrendered to American forces and were soon working for the U.S. Army. Within 15 years, von Braun would be the chief architect of the Saturn rocket that powered the Apollo program. The Cold War space race was, in many ways, a continuation of German rocket science under new management. So where does this leave Die Glocke? In the absence of evidence, the legend has only grown. Television programs have featured supposed eyewitnesses. Researchers have pointed to strange concrete structures near the Riese complex and claimed they were test platforms. Some have suggested the bell was spirited away at the end of the war, hidden in South America or Antarctica, or even reverse-engineered by the Americans in secret programs. The story has become a fixture of alternative history, blending with other conspiracy theories about UFOs, secret Nazi bases, and occult experimentation. But every serious historian who has investigated the claim has reached the same conclusion. There is no credible evidence that Die Glocke ever existed. The physics described in the legend don't align with any known principles. The supposed witness testimonies cannot be verified. The entire narrative appears to be a modern invention, possibly based on misunderstood fragments of real projects or deliberate fabrication. It is, in short, a compelling myth. Yet, myths tell us something important. The enduring fascination with Die Glocke reveals our deep anxieties about technology, power, and the secrets that governments keep. It also reflects a kind of dark wonder at what the Nazi regime accomplished technologically, even as we recoil from the moral horror of how those accomplishments were achieved. The V-2, the Me-262, the Horten flying wing, these were not science fiction. They were real machines, built by real people, often at terrible human cost. And they genuinely did change the world. The tragic irony is that the Nazis devoted enormous resources to these wonder weapons in a desperate attempt to reverse their inevitable defeat. If those same resources had been used more rationally earlier in the war, the outcome might have been different. But by the time these technologies reached operational status, Germany was already losing on every front. The wonder weapons were too little, too late. They could not compensate for strategic blunders, industrial shortcomings, and the moral bankruptcy of the regime that produced them. Today you can visit the Riese complex in Poland. It's a tourist attraction now with guided tours through the tunnels and bunkers. There are no time machines, no bells made of exotic metals, just crumbling concrete, rusted metal, and the weight of history. And perhaps that's fitting, because the real story doesn't need embellishment. The documented facts about Nazi secret weapons are extraordinary enough. They mark a moment when science fiction began to merge with science fact, when the impossible became merely difficult, and when humanity took its first steps toward technologies that would define the second half of the 20th century. So what is the truth behind Hitler's time machine? The truth is that it never existed. But the search for it has revealed something more valuable, a clearer understanding of what actually happened in those desperate final years of the Third Reich, when brilliant minds were enslaved to a monstrous cause, and the future was being invented in the shadow of apocalypse. The wonder weapons were real. Their legacy lives on in every rocket that reaches for the stars and every jet that breaks the sound barrier. And that legacy, complex and troubling as it is, tells us more about human capability and human folly than any legend ever could. The tunnels beneath Poland still hold secrets, but they're not the secrets conspiracy theorists imagine. They're the secrets of what humans can achieve and what they can endure, and what price is paid when genius serves evil. Those are the truths worth excavating. Those are the stories worth telling. And they don't require time travel to matter. They echo forward through every year since 1945, shaping the world we inhabit today.